Hello, hello. Welcome back to the HSYS podcast. I'm your host, Jalyssa, and today we are going to chit chat about identity. Ooh, identity is such a taboo word sometimes. I feel like we hear purpose and identity thrown around so much, especially in the Christian community. It can be exhausting. It can be exhausting to hear. It can be exhausting to talk about. It can be exhausting to try to share about. It could also be exciting and intriguing. And I have been very intrigued about identity in the last few years. I've felt this urge to explore a little bit of identity. And I feel like I notice some things about identity when I'm reading the scriptures, when I'm in conversations with women, when I'm in crowds of people. I start to really see how our perception of our identity really either keeps us from something or propels us towards something. And so, let's talk a little bit about identity. Whenever I am going to interview a woman for a podcast and I tell her, hey, when you come on the podcast and I ask you to introduce yourself, I don't necessarily want the introduction to be about what you produce, but let's talk a little bit about who you are. And I have found that in doing that, whether it be I'm dialoguing with a woman who's going to be on my podcast, or I'm talking to some women who I'm going to be on a panel with, or I'm just getting to know a woman, they're often taken aback and they have to actually think a little harder. What's interesting to me is that it has become so much easier to introduce ourselves by what we produce, by what we do. Hey, I'm Jalyssa, I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a podcaster, I work in ministry, I work in fashion, and I'm grateful to be here today. In doing that, I didn't actually share with people who I was. I just shared with people what I do. And I started to get a little bit less intrigued about what people do and more intrigued about the person, particularly the woman that is producing the thing. It's always funny when I kind of take that approach with a woman and she's like, oh, let me think. Oh, where do I begin? Well, what do you want to know? And then we get to have this beautiful, enriching conversation. And I actually get to know the woman. And then what she does or what she produces makes a lot more sense to me. And all of these different thoughts and conversations around how we introduce ourselves and what we produce and who we are and who am I, or even me being intrigued by women who are so fully and wholly themselves, even when the world around them requires so much from them. So of course, I started to seek the Lord about this. I was in 1 Samuel one day. Y'all, I love 1 Samuel, 1 and 2 Samuel. I love all of the life of David so much. And I was in Samuel for 1 and 2 Samuel for almost a few years back in 2023. So a couple years back. And I was seeking the Lord on this conversation of identity and trying to really understand a little bit more deeply what identity is and how I can walk more fully in my personal identity, and also how I can come alongside women as an alongsider as they are trying to walk more fully and wholly in their identity. And something really started to stand out to me, and that was the difference between Saul and David. In 1 Samuel, when Saul has that moment where the Lord, requires him to do something, he does something different, and then the Lord departs from him. And later you see, right before David is anointed king, Samuel is grieved. And then the Lord was like, Samuel, bro, how long are you going to grieve over Saul? Like, let's move on. And he tells him to go find a young David and anoint him. And I felt a little bit like Samuel, like, dang, like maybe Saul is just misunderstood, or Saul, he's just a little insecure. Like, I just don't really think he gets it. And that was it. That was the moment that the Lord really started to unravel identity for me. What was the difference between Saul and David? The difference was that Saul was anointed king and was very inward and self-dependent in his trajectory and his journey as king. We see this when the time came for Saul to be anointed king, and he was hiding. I think that speaks so much to how insecure and uncertain he was of who he could be as the Imago Dei, as a son of God. Perhaps he was so consumed with Saul and what Saul could produce and what would be required of Saul as king that he hid. And his decisions as king after that all kind of allude to this insecurity and instability in him that we don't necessarily see in David. So we get to the moment where David is anointed as king. And so David was exactly where he was supposed to be, to do what he was supposed to be doing in that season of his life as a shepherd boy in the field. David just seemed very certain of where he needed to be. He gets called in, he gets anointed as king, and then he goes back to doing what he was doing before. So fast forward, in comes the story of Goliath, and this happens after David is anointed king. We see again a very insecure Saul and all of his army with all of their weapons stand before Goliath, trembling and with fear. And then in comes David. He was going back and forth, doing again what he was supposed to be doing in that season of his life, feeding his brothers on the battlefield for his pops, back to the shepherd to tend to his sheep. He wasn't trying to force his way into a battle. He wasn't trying to prove something. Although he had been anointed king, he was still doing what he was supposed to be doing in that season of life. The moment comes where David is like, yo, y'all are wild, and why are y'all so afraid? And his brothers are like, ain't you supposed to be tending to some sheep? And the armies are trembling, and Saul is uncertain, and they're so afraid of this Philistine. And we see Saul's insecurity and his lack of assurance in who he could be in God as a son of God play out in his fear of this Philistine. David comes up and he's like, I know y'all are not afraid of this uncircumcised, raggedy Philistine when we are the army of the Lord. Whoa, what confidence must he have had as a son of God to be a young boy, not even in the army, but so sure that his father, who he was made in his image, would empower them to defeat this Philistine. His brothers aren't you supposed to be tending the sheep? They were scared, but they sure had a lot to say to David, didn't they? Saul's like, bro, you cannot fight. You are just a boy. You are but a youth. And David's like, listen, I've been assigned to the sheep as a shepherd. And because that role requires me to be a boss, to kill lions and tigers and bears, I've done what I needed to do to keep the sheep safe. The same God who gave me that power is the God who will give me the power to crush this uncircumcised Philistine. He was speaking as a son of God. Saul was so attached to his army that he was leading, to his role and title as king, and to the weapons that he attained as king for his army, that his eyes were not up, they were inward. His eyes were not up to the one who had anointed him. David was so sure of who he was as a son of God that he went into this. He didn't say, oh, I'm anointed king and I'm gonna be king one day after you, so let me do what I do and kill this Philistine. He didn't need to prove nothing. He had no desire to perform. He just showed up confident in the God who had sent him, and he defeated the Philistine. What was the biggest difference between David and Saul? I think it was an identity crisis. What was the biggest difference between David and Saul? Sonship. David was functioning out of sonship. Sonship, by definition, is the state or quality or relationship of being a son. It can describe the bond between a son and his father, or more broadly, the characteristics and responsibilities that a son is expected to have. As believers, we know that sonship means that we were literally adopted by God as his children. In that moment that I read that passage of scripture in that way for the first time, and acknowledging that all of Saul's weaknesses came from him being so inward focused, and all of David's strengths kind of came from his reliance on the one who sent him. And David was truly just aware of being the Imago Dei. Saul was so consumed with the mission or the title. I really started to undo some of my own beliefs, and it started to unravel some things in me. For instance, when I introduced myself, in certain settings, I would sometimes be a little intimidated because I didn't have a degree, or I didn't have some big job title, or in ministry settings where I'm maybe on a panel and there's a lot of women who are pastors and authors, or I realized how much a lot of that would drive the way that I would show up. And the exhaustion of womanhood for me and for a lot of the women that I have walked with through this concept of identity was, we are just a performing people. We become so attached to these titles and these roles that we tend to be hyper fixated on the role. So whether it be mom, whether it be wife, whether it be therapist or doctor or pastor or ministry leader or author or influencer, because that is at the forefront of our brain at all times, and that is, we perceive ourselves through the lens of the roles and the responsibilities and the titles that we have attained, we start to just perform to show up as or meet the need of whatever that role or responsibility requires us to be. And when we actually kind of lose sight of the daughter, of the son, of the person who God has actually breathed life into to actually produce those things. So for me, in some seasons, that has looked like, of course, I'm a mom of 5. And so this concept of being like the sacrificial lamb of the family, like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't get dressed all the time because I could be using that time to be reading a book to my child. Or maybe I eat standing up and it's so honorable that I never sit down and I never take a break because I'm always readily available to do everything that my child needs at all times. And times being in ministry, I've been in ministry since I was very young. There has been seasons of my life where I'm only going to this book and I'm only in this word to do ministry, to have a word for one of the girls I'm discipling, or to have a word for this conference that I'm speaking at, or to have a word, a really good caption or a really good blog to post. And I'm performing. I'm even performing for ministry's sake. Take a moment, and even if you have to press pause on this podcast, and ask yourself, what are my roles and titles? And do I feel like I am performing to be that thing? Or do I feel like I am that thing from a point of overflow? That is really where my perspective of identity and purpose started to shift, from being something that felt a little bit irritating to have another conversation about, or to hear about, or to talk about again, to being something exciting to pursue. And I think the really hard part of that is people will applaud you for your performance. People will applaud you for being the best this, the most appealing that, the most successful this, the most sacrificial that. People will applaud you for your performance without acknowledging that the person behind the performance is slowly fading away. And I think a lot of the time that comes from us being so obsessed with the mission rather than the missionary. That comes oftentimes for us in ministry with being so obsessed with the Missio day that we detach from the importance of tending to the Imago day. That becomes so crucial in the life of women who are the foundation of a family, or the backbone behind a business, or the strong one in the marriage or the friendship or the relationship or the family. Because people will applaud you for being the best performer. People will applaud you for producing the most without acknowledging that the machine has not been oiled and it is slowly starting to rust and decay. And I think that's what happened to Saul. I think that Saul, from the moment he was anointed king and he was hiding when it was time for him to show up, we see in his life this unraveling, hyper fixation on the role and responsibilities and title, and this lack of intimacy with the Lord. And I believe as men and women of God, we begin to struggle with identity crisis when we become so hyper fixated on the roles and accolades and responsibilities and titles that we are forgetting intimacy with the one who actually created us for those things. We see David being called a man after God's own heart. That tells me that there was this depth of intimacy that he had with the Father. And it was in that intimacy with the Father and that overflow of intimacy with the one who had sent him and created him and made him that he was able to strike down the Philistine, that he was able to protect the sheep from the lions and tigers and bears. It wasn't necessarily because David was that great. It was because David was a son who knew his identity in Christ. And when you know the one who sent you, you are more victorious in the mission that you are sent on. And that is where this undoing of false identity began in me a few years back. And I really started to hone in more on what does it mean to be consecrated? What does it mean to be intimate with Jesus? What does it mean to lay down my efforts and my trying and trust in the one who sent me? And I started to see that as I was more filled up, feasting on the word of God and on the worship of God and on the teaching of the scriptures and on the community of Christ and being in a beautiful body of believers, a lot of what you as my internet family have experienced and seen as good or great has literally just been an overflow of my intimacy with the Lord. And so recently I had the privilege of being on a panel, incredible women who have just done really amazing things. And we all introduced ourselves on the panel, and my introduction has been a little different in the last couple of years. And so when it was my turn, I introduced myself as, hi, I'm Jalyssa. When I was 17 years old, the Lord ravished my heart, and I shared what the Lord has done in me and who the Lord is to me. And then I said, and because of those things, He has enabled me and empowered me to be a wife of 13 years and a mother to 5 brilliant sons and an entrepreneur and a podcaster and work in ministry. And then we began the discussion afterwards. Multiple people asked me about my introduction and the way I introduced myself, and they were intrigued by that. And I had the opportunity to ask them, tell me who you are, introduce yourself to me without telling me first what you do or what you produce. And it was so fun, hey, I'm this person from here, and the Lord saved me from this, and now I'm this. That framework, that shift in introduction, because that shift in awareness of who the person is, the person that God saved, the person that God cares about, the person that God is sending. And then acknowledging, because of the work that the Lord has done in me, because of the God who sent me, because of the one whose image I was created in, I am able to be the King of Israel. I am able to be the podcaster, the wife, the mother, the friend, the business owner, the entrepreneur, the CEO, the athlete, the whatever that may be. And in follow-up conversation with some of these women, it has been so exciting to see how such a shift in what I produce to the one who has allowed me to produce, what that shift has done in them, and how that shift has them being sent in such a much more bold and beautiful and intentional way. And it was simply a shift of being so obsessed with the outcome and obsessed with the title and the mission and the achievements and the accolades, to being more obsessed with the one who breathed the breath in our lungs and formed us from dirt in the first place. And I think that shift can really help us with the identity crisis that we have as people of God. And I think that a simple shift such as that will get us from being stuck to sent, will get us from being confused to compelled, will get us from being uncertain to assurance. And when people see us like they saw the apostles in Acts and realize that they were uneducated men, maybe they didn't have a lot of titles and accolades and achievements, but simply they had been with Jesus. There was almost this sense of awe at the acknowledgement that the apostles had been with Jesus, and everything that they produced came from their identity as sons of God, as disciples who were sent. And they literally changed the world. And sis, I believe that you can too. A simple shift of perspective, a simple awareness of our identity as the Imago Dei, as those made in the image of God, who are first hyper fixated and obsessed with that, And then we allow that, the intimacy that comes with that, that obsession with being made in his image, to be the very thing that produces the woman who is on mission. I think a lot of things will shift in your life. They did in mine. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of Hey Sis, Yes You. I love these conversations that I have with women offline on identity and on intimacy with the Lord and on who we are as women and what God has put us on earth for. And a lot of the times these conversations and these things are much bigger issues than I believe that they need to be. I know that in his word, that in this book, we have access to this understanding and awareness of what God actually does want us to do and why God did put us here. This feels like the perfect time to share that in all of my excitement and love and passion for walking with women and having done ministry for so long, really wanted to take it to a newer level. And so I got my life coaching certification and have been praying for the last year on what the Lord would have me do with that. And as I shift from being a stay-at-home mom into more career focused, I couldn't imagine doing anything that wouldn't allow me to walk with women and encourage women and empower women towards the thing that God has called them to and God has assigned them to. And so I have decided to use whatever wisdom and insights God has given me through this book and through my own personal intimate time with him, along with the life coaching certification and all of the education that I got in pursuing being a life coach, to launch a cohort for women just like me and you, who are really wanting to move forward, who are really wanting to get unstuck. This will be a 6-week cohort that I'm offering to 10 women at a time. I want to keep it intimate and small for now. 10 women at a time to just work together for 6 weeks in group coaching on getting unstuck, on moving forward, on honing in on who we are as who we are as image bearers and how we move forward on mission as women of God. And so if this is something that sounds good to you, send me a DM on Instagram at xoxo, send me an email, Jalyssa at xoxo.com, and let's chat about getting you plugged into this upcoming cohort. I look forward to walking with these women, seeing the incredible work that I believe the Lord will do in this women through this curriculum that I have worked so hard on. It has been reviewed by mental health professionals, by pastors and ministry leaders, and I believe that God has given me something to share with women that will really, really empower and propel them into a new chapter in their stories. Thank you again for being on the podcast. I look forward to being back here with you guys chatting next week. Next week, we are going to have a guest with us, so you can take a break from listening to my voice, and it's going to be good. It's going to be exciting. I'm just honored to know such incredible women and to just sit down with such incredible women and hear all of the beautiful things that God has set them out on mission to do. And I'm excited to share more of that with you. I'll see you back next week, sis. As always, if this has blessed you, send it to somebody else who you believe it will be a blessing to. And I look forward to chatting with you soon. Hasta luego.